Cool. I think we're going to kick off there. We're at 3 minutes past 11. So welcome, friends. Thank you so much for coming along on this sunny Friday. Just by way of introduction, before we crack on, I'm Ryan Lock, so one of the co-founders of Planes and the product side of the business. And Henry.
So I'm Henry. I am also co-founder at Planes and I am CTO.
So we're Planes, a digital product studio, and we work with clients in lifestyle and fintech, insurance, energy to launch AI products and services. So we'll crack straight into this webinar, and I'm going to start with a little story here, which is always a nice way to start. Taking you back, all the way back to the 1900s. And back in the 1900s, factories, they ran on steam, right? So you had one giant steam engine in the basement, and it had a huge spinning shaft down the middle of the building and all these belts coming off driving machines. And then electricity shows up, and it's one of the biggest technological shifts in a generation. And the factory owners, they rip out all the steam engines, they drop in one giant electric motor in the middle, same spot, same shaft, same belts, and then they just sit there and they wait for the magic, right? And nothing really happens, and productivity doesn't move for like 20 or 30 years. And everyone starts wondering, like, what's going on? This, big power of electricity didn't really kind of pay off. But the answer was that to effectively use electric motors, you needed one small one on every machine, not that one big one in the middle, the same as steam engines, right? So while the electric motor was a major invention, without rearranging the rest of the equipment in the factory, they didn't get any productivity gain. And it kind of reminds me of what's happening now, because just a few weeks ago, we were sitting with an exec team in a healthcare company, and they were talking about the AI they'd bought, and everyone had like a new Claude license, right? And they were really struggling to point to any kind of number or gain which they'd had. And the tech lead, he kind of shrugged and he's like, well, we bought these tools. Like, what else can we do here? Is it just down to the people using them? But just those individual licenses, they just make one person a little bit faster at their own job. And it's kind of like the electric motor in the factories, right? If you have a technology like AI, you need to organize the rest of the business actually around it, rather than just like kind of dropping in the tools and hoping something was going to change. And if you look at the kind of the big numbers from the big players, they back this up, right? So 95% of enterprises report no measurable P&L return from generative AI. That's from MIT NANDA. From our mates over at McKinsey, in 2025, 88% of organizations now use AI in at least one function, but only 6% are seeing a 5% or greater EBIT impact. So it kind of feels like the adoption is everywhere, but the return isn't, right? And every one of us has probably had at some stage, I mean, I know I have had some form of like existential crisis about not keeping up with this. And if you go onto LinkedIn, or at least on my LinkedIn, I'm probably getting like, targeted by the algorithm. But if you're on there for more than 6 seconds, then you're completely flooded with these stories of running teams of agents, and they're building like billion-dollar businesses with like 3 people from their basement or something like that. It's easy to feel massively overwhelmed and a little bit like this. But I think the good news here of this is, I think the majority of it is hyperbole and probably isn't true. But there are businesses doing all sorts of super interesting things at the forefront of tech, and there is a lot of change happening for some businesses. But the saying I really like in this instance is like, when there is this big set coming in, it's better to be out there and paddling rather than sitting on the beach and just kind of watching it. So this webinar is about coming out into the break and having a little paddle with Planes and seeing what we're up to. So we're going to do 3 things. The first one, what it means to be AI native. The second one is our mental model for actually getting impact from AI. And then the third one, okay, the specific like AI plumbing at Planes. What is our infrastructure? What is our workflows at a high level? Cool. Over to the definition bit, which is the fast part. What does it mean to be AI native? This term gets thrown around a heck of a lot. We've had no end of debates at Planes about what this means. But fundamentally, it just means that like an AI native business is one which is built from the ground up to leverage AI for value creation and problem solving. Now, if your business which I'm sure most of you are, if it's more than a couple of years old, like AI solutions weren't even around when you started, or they weren't available really. So it's much harder to retrospectively fit this. But we think that the value isn't binary, right? So every business can get value from getting onto that journey. And what we want to do is we want to take you through our framework for how to think about, where you can implement AI in any business at all, and the way at which can actually add value. So we've got a little mental model for this, and it seems simplistic at the start, but stick with me. If you can strip any business down, it really does like three different things, right? It knows things, it does things, and it decides things. And we like to think about this as memory and workflows and judgment. We use those terms, I guess, because it connects to what AI can actually provide. And out of those, it goes and it delivers like some sort of product or a service. So your bank or a hospital or a shop, Planes, a digital agency. And any business can implement AI into these three components of a business, but how much of it you deploy is going to look completely different depending on what type of business you are, of course. And we're going to dive into each one of these kind of pillars to understand how does AI impact them, and then what are the actual like practical examples from Planes. So with that framing, let's have a little look at the first one here, which is memory. So memory, this is everything a business knows, right? So you've got knowledge in people's heads, you've got IP of a firm, you've got all this like hard-won experience, you've got raw data. You can't do business without memory, and you can't like really do anything without memory because you just won't know how, right? It's also, I guess, what makes a business much more valuable over time, because as the memory, it compounds, if it's like tenure of people, IP, or just the number of reps getting the same task, as that compounds, the business becomes more valuable because it can deliver its product or service more effectively. I'm going to use a little example here, a winemaking business, act for a Friday, potentially. And I've been very creative and I've called it the winery. This is a business you probably wouldn't immediately expect to be AI native. And for the winemaker, that memory is everything that the vineyard knows about making wine, right? So you got your grape varietals, your terroir, how to harvest, the local weather effects on the vines. You've got years of like tasting notes and any other like live data which is coming in. So you've got the same shape as any other business, but that knowledge and that memory is all for that particular vineyard or for winemaking. And where does that memory live today? Or I guess like traditionally, where did that memory live? Like any business at all, it's like completely scattered, right? It's in people's heads, it's spread across tools and documents, it's filed away, it's potentially completely forgotten as people leave the business, and it starts to feel like kind of chaotic. And you never quite know, or you never quite like have all of the information that you need at the moment you need it, right? And so some of these things will start to feel like super familiar to anybody who has spent any time in any organization. But along comes AI, which has changed this, right? So what if we could start to compile all of your data, all of your context, your decisions, your conversations, and you put that all together as a reference to create this one like singular recipe, memory, and you can call upon that like whenever you need it, right? So to go back a little bit to when we started to see commercial AI tools like coming out, this was, this is a screenshot of ChatGPT, and you'll remember it started with people saving like little snippets, right? Okay, and asking ChatGPT, remember, hey, ChatGPT, my name is Ryan, and can you stop, please, for the love of God, like using em dashes? And then ChatGPT, they brought along projects, and you could go and keep like context across different chats, and that felt super powerful. But it was still massively limited, right? Because half of the context lives in conversations that never got captured. 6 months later, that stuff was moving like extremely quick, and it still is they started to connect those tools up to your Slack, to your meeting notes, to your Notion, and it became that little bit more powerful. But at Planes, we went, okay, how do we extend that out to a memory layer that would truly understand your business context and truly understand your data? And how could you actually start to make that interface a little more useful day to day as well? So over to Henry to talk about our new mate, Rog.
Introducing Roger. So Roger sits across kind of all of our tools. Roger listens. He potentially retains those pieces of information that flow in as memories. And then sometimes even responds when it knows the answer, given the context and the memory it's kind of gathered over time. So here's how Roger roughly works. So when you think about it at work, or at least at Planes, I know this is the case, almost everything that we produce ends up as a kind of digital artifact. So if you think about it like a Slack thread, a meeting note, a Google Doc, or even like a line of code. And that's just spread across these dozens and dozens of tools, all siloed, potentially some of them integrated to an extent, but mostly siloed and just kind of noise scattered across the business. So Roger's job is to kind of try to organize some of those artifacts that crop up in any one of our tools and synthesize those into memory. And in this case, when we're talking about memory, actually all we're really talking about is some summarized kind of note, effectively like a notepad, a set of text files. And once it's in there, it means that any one of our surfaces, so that's Claude, Slack, wherever, we can kind of draw on it. So we can kind of ask it questions. It's there when we kind of need information from our colleagues and some additional context is needed. All you need to do is kind of just ask Roger. So it's not just feeding in everything that it receives into a giant database of memories. It is actually selective. So when one new piece of information comes in, Roger will make a judgment based on a simple set of rules and what it's seen so far and what it has memory of. And then it will learn to like place it correctly in the memory in memories as is most suitable for that new piece of information. Along with that, and something that we've had quite a lot of kind of fun with recently is proactivity. So along with deciding whether or not to place a memory and whether or not it's important, Roger will make a decision as to whether or not it's able to respond. So it will draw on its initial information, it will make a quick decision, and then it will go and research across all of the tools to come up with a suitable answer. And we've had quite a lot of fun with that. Obviously, we've kind of been tuning it up and down as needed, but we've got to a pretty good pace with it. And then finally, with a system like this, as we gather memories over a long period of time, you can start to see the memories drift. So what that means is that we get left with old memories that are potentially not relevant anymore. Maybe they were for an event that happened in the past that we don't really need to think about anymore. Or if memories can get duplicated or similar memories can crop up. So we have this notion of dreaming. And dreaming is where an agent on its own will go and review all of the memory all at once and synthesize it into and resculpt it into what makes sense for that given point in time. And we think that this just gets us into this position where we don't get this kind of drift over time. And we're a few months into using this now, and it's working really nicely. So next up, I want to show you a quick demo, and we'll start somewhere simple. So what you're seeing here is Roger in Slack. I was away on holiday last week, so I'm just asking Roger, what's been going on. And this is like a really, obviously simple interaction, but it's something that's been particularly useful already. Roger knows all the projects that I'm assigned to, and Roger can kind of give a summary on each of those projects. What you're seeing in this video is, yes, I'm assigned to Roger as a project, which is a bit meta, but he's given me a summary just below it as well. So something a little bit more interesting. Something a little bit more interesting is how we can use Roger across multiple tools. So on the right here, I'm again in Slack, and I've said that Ryan has deprioritized this particular ticket. Um, could you please give me an update on what's going on? Roger's given me an update, and in the background, saved that as a memory because there was some information in that prompt. When I've come across to Linear, which is our project management tool, I've asked Linear, Roger, what's been going on with this particular ticket? It gives me the summary, and then it also says, oh, FYI, I know that Ryan's been thinking about deprioritizing this ticket. Do you want me to move this into a different column on the board? So that's kind of how you can see that this memory just gets absorbed and how Roger appears across all these surfaces with that same level of detail and memory. And then finally, looking at how Roger can be proactive. This is a new team channel that I've created just for this demo, but I'm asking broadly in this channel what was mentioned at stand up, how was stand up this morning, because I wasn't at that session. Roger comes back and gives a quick roundup of what everybody said in their morning stand up, which is really useful. Roger's absorbed meeting notes from Granola and is able to like quickly come back with that information rather than a teammate needing to jump in.
Nice. Cheers, Hennis. Yeah. As Henry mentioned, like Roger was only released a few months ago, right? And when he was first like dropped into Slack, it was kind of just annoying, right? Because he didn't know much yet. And over time, I think the value or the benefit like starts to compound. He learns more and more, and then he becomes more and more useful. So now today, like he's starting to be kind of this extremely valuable team member who just knows like everything about all of your projects. But with this perfect memory, like how does it actually change the work that we do? Which brings us to the second part of this model. We spoke about memory, and now we're going to do workflows. So if a memory is what a business knows, workflows are what the business or what you do with them, right? So a workflow is just a step in delivering your product or your service. And if we come back to our lovely example at the winery, okay, so they do things like they add ingredients, they hold the tanks at temperatures, they create labels, they have like they process payments, and lots more things. And some of those steps you can hand to an agent, some of them might stay human. And if you think about your own business, you might find, or you will find that there are many, many more workflows, right? It starts to look a little bit like this. But once you understand those, you can start to decide based on some criteria which of those might be able to be assisted or delegated to AI. And you start to kind of find that more and more will start to pop up over time. And when we at Plains, I guess if we work with clients and like transforming workflows with AI, this is kind of exactly what you do, but it looks more like a blueprint like this, right? For delivering a product or a service. And then you go ahead and actually identify, okay, what are those opportunities for AI? So I guess let's take a look at some of the infrastructure for workflows at Plains, Henry Kirkness.
Cool. So there are obviously many different ways of automating workflows away. Starting with manually coded workflows, which obviously comes with a lot of flexibility, but at a little cost to maintain. And that's actually how we've built Roger. Roger is a custom coded agent. Then moving on to no code tools, there are many of these in the market. The N8N is a great one if you're looking to get set up with something a little bit more kind of processized, automating something away into N8N. It's also got some great AI kind of plugins as well. But today we're going to be talking about skills, which many of you may already be using, know about. But if we move on to the next slide, I'll just give you a quick kind of foundation definition, just so we're all on the same page. So skills are reusable packages that give Claude kind of task-specific or organization-specific expertise. The really great thing about skills is that they are literally just written documents. So if you imagine handing over any task to a colleague, you probably write a sequence of steps or instructions. That's exactly what a skill is. And so you don't really need to be technical at all to go and create your first skill. And I recommend just going and trying just to see what it's like. So skills can be personal to you, so they can embed something that's specific to your job and your role, something that you're doing on repetition. But then they're also great to be able to then share across your organization so that that repetition can be leveraged across other people as well. Which is something I wanted to talk about today, is how to kind of scale skills across your team. So as the skills and AI adoption generally rises across your organization, you'll start to see messages crop up in Slack that might look something like this. This is essentially a coworker who's created a great skill that they've been using, and they find useful, and they'd like to share it. However, this doesn't really scale, because what happens when somebody was on holiday when they shared it and it gets lost up the Slack thread. They're going to have to dig through, or potentially probably not even get a look in. Or what happens if the author of the skill wants to go and update that the skill? They're going to have to go and reshare the file, and it's all a bit messy. People are wondering whether they can install it again, or they have to delete the old. It just gets all a little bit tangled. And then finally, wouldn't it be great if we can kind of bundle the skills into like themes or into disciplines? So for example, this skill is talking about how to create great feedback. So potentially we could create a kind of group or something that encompasses all people and ops type skills, for example. So the answer for all of this is a little known Claude feature called plugin marketplaces, which is something that we've really been kind of leveraging hard at Plains as a way of rolling out AI and increasing adoption. So plugin marketplaces really have an answer to all of those three questions. They're just a kind of a storage space for your skills that sit in a repository. And they first and foremost allow you to roll out skills and roll out updates as you go without people needing to know that they're being updated or be conscious of the fact that they'll need to be. Team members can go into their Claude accounts, and they can go and browse skills that are available across your organization, and they can kind of just click to install, which is really, really great. And then finally, being able to group things into discipline has been really helpful as well. So think about, what your engineering bundle might look like. You might be able to, collect a few different skills together, which is also known in the context of this, a plugin. So if there was one thing today that I'd really recommend, it's thinking about how you can adopt skills in your organization, and potentially going and look at plugin marketplaces as a way to kind of distribute skills across your organization as a kind of a good practice. And then finally, to kind of aid our adoption and increase like the visibility of skills, we've built a layer on top of our plugin marketplace called the Hanger, which is a glossy front end and a way of being able to browse and sort through and understand each individual skill before users go in and install them, which has also proved really, really successful. So now for a demo, I wanted to show you something a little bit aspirational, perhaps. And this is talking about how we can achieve self-maintaining software. Now, I'm not going to try and say that software development is solved. We can go and just set our agents free on our repositories. But this is just an example of how you can kind of leverage a nice workflow to do some of the kind of basics in a product and engineering team. So the simple part of our job as a product and engineering team is, one, we review analytics and look at error monitoring. It might be off the back of that we then go and create a bunch of tasks or to-dos for those given issues or updates that we need to roll out. As a team, we'll come together in a meeting, we'll review those tickets, and then potentially one engineer might go off and go and solve and roll out that change. So I've kind of put together a skill that more or less goes end to end on that process. And I'll demonstrate it in this quick video. So this is post hog on the left here. I'm going to jump into error tracking just to show you the error that's cropped up. So there was one error in the last week that's come about, and I'm going to then jump off into the right here in Claude and run my skill. So this skill is post hog to linear tickets. So it's going to go and have a look through post hog at the last week. It's going to see that there was one error, and it's going to then run an additional skill under the hood. So this is what we call a skill chain. That additional skill will craft our gold standard ticket at Planes. And you can see here that's then produced that on linear. As a team, we can then come in and see all these tickets roll in the backlog. So we could run this skill on a schedule. And then if and when we're happy with it, and if we think it's doable by an agent, we can then simply go and click assign to cursor, which is a coding agent, which is going to run in the cloud, and we can see its progress at the bottom of the ticket. And once it's done, it'll create a kind of pull request on our repository, which is basically to say it can never go straight into production. It always needs the human review. But for simple tasks, we've seen this work quite well.
Nice. Love to see it. Okay, so we did the memory bit. We've got some workflow sitting on top of that. So the third sort of leg of the stool here is, of course, judgment. And this is the part I think which people get like quite nervous about, right? And I think it's the part which is the most misunderstood, because judgment is your taste, your decisions, strategy, opinions, all that. And I think that the instinct here is to say that, right, judgment is the bit that stays human. It has to stay human. I think that is maybe half right. Because judgment, I guess it's a little bit nuanced, and you can maybe split that out a little bit, right? Some of the judgment you can actually encode. So the standards that you can put into words, or your guardrails, your non-negotiables, you can turn that into rules that agents have to follow. So if you take like an example here, our designers, they will bake design principles straight into a design system in code, so that an agent can, as Henry described, like go and like pick up tickets and actually ship production code, but it won't do it in a way that we don't like, right? That is against our kind of design principles. The next part of this is judgment that you absolutely do reserve. So these are the real human calls. It's your ethics, your ambiguous kind of like high stakes decisions, and you want to deliberately keep those. And especially if you're in a regulated business, you're going to reserve a lot more of that on purpose, and you're going to make that line, I guess, like very explicit and auditable as well. But of that judgment that you're reserving, you can start to sharpen that as well, right? Because when you have better memory and you've got more signal from the market, the calls that you can make are now better informed. So you've got this business which gets to retain and build on what it knows with this memory, and some of those workflows they get cheaper and faster. The value really of what you're doing in the business, it kind of moves up into that judgment area. And we really think that this is like a massive opportunity for people to be spending more time on the more human parts of the job, the stuff that people probably want to be doing more of, your judgment, your creativity, your relationships. And if you think about our winemaker here, like there's not going to be an agent that is going to decide what a good Pinot Noir tastes like or what the brand should stand for. But that winemaker who has better memory, he's got better signal from the market, he's he's got far more to go on, and he can start to spend more time on like making those calls and be creative rather than firefighting. So where should you start? Because that was a bunch of information. We've looked at this framework, but what are the actual kind of practical elements of this? A word of honesty, I think, is that none of this is linear, right? Technology, as you guys know, is like just moving insanely quick, and we, as Plains, like definitely haven't cracked it. A lot of what we've tried has been rubbish, but we do start new things constantly. We're always experimenting, which means we get a lot of reps, and the stuff that does like kind of stick, it's actually genuinely changing like how the studio gets run as well. So before I answer the question of where do you start, there's a caveat here. Like any webinar, the knowledge in this room is going to be mixed, right? You might be super new to this, and you're like, what are these two guys talking about? And then at the other end of this normal distribution, you may be like flying miles ahead. So where you go from here is going to depend a lot on where you are at the moment. But if you're at the stage, I guess, where you have a good understanding of the basics, you guys might, your team might be using Claude, you might be using individual skills, but you want to start seeing like that organizational change. Here's, I think, a starting point, which would work for a lot of people. On the memory side, you need to really create the most complete memory for your business that you can, right? So short of developing the bespoke tools that we spoke about today, how can you create that kind of spine that runs through the business to gather as much memory so that you can start to trust that it knows everything it needs to? There are like some off-the-shelf like tools which are becoming available. So Anthropic just a couple of weeks ago released Tag, which is designed to do exactly that. It's pretty early, but of course, like it will just continue to improve very, very quickly. I think about 12 hours ago, OpenAI just released like ChatGPT Work, which of course I haven't used it yet, but similarly, the idea is to build that context layer for a business. On the workflow side, a very good first step here is like mapping all of your existing workflows, because otherwise it can just feel like you're shooting in the dark, right? So if you map all of your existing workflows and then try to take small isolated workflows to experiment on, but always having that map there so that you can kind of orientate yourself about what are you experimenting on, does it work or does it not, I think is going to be useful as well. And then finally, on the judgment piece, identifying in that workflow map the parts of your business that you absolutely need to retain judgment, or you feel you can sharpen your judgment. That'll give you these principles that you can fall back on, because I think this is always like very, very scary for teams as well. When you start to experiment with these things, it's people get worried. What part of my job am I going to lose? Am I going to lose the creativity? So I think formulating those principles as a business is just super helpful to make sure you can kind of like navigate this pretty smoothly as well. If this still feels like, okay, a little bit of a tough place to start, or you wanted some help with this, Plains is running free intro sessions as well as at the moment. So what we do in those sessions is we would look at your specific business and then help to build out what would memory look like for your business, what would individual workflows look like for your business or your clients or your products as well. That takes us right up to the end of this session. And what we'll do is we'll go and open this up for questions. If we could do that. I need to open this question thing, this Q&A. If there have been anything. Oh, 0 questions so far. If you do have a question, feel free to drop into this chat here. There's like a little Q&A box. So you can do that.
Q&A section rather than, there's obviously a chat. So ideally in the Q&A specific window.
No questions. How good. Unreal. Everything has been answered.
Everything answered.
Everything has been answered. We happy to answer, I guess, as well, like a bit of FAQ, I think, on this sort of stuff. What do you think, Henry? Oh, yeah, we've got a couple of things coming here. Oh, how do I see these? Oh, here we go. When
I can go for that first one from
yeah.
Tom. So there's a question: when creating a memory layer, did you do a big tidy up before it went live, or did you just throw it all in? So Roger, so obviously through the development of Roger, there was a lot of noise, crap, testing data that went in. So we definitely tidied that up. Um, but Roger basically started, he was, born at a date and then was able to look back. I think we had him go back maybe like 2 weeks worth of data. And then kind of from then on, he's just been kind of building up his context. So there was no need to necessarily clean things up or anything. By design, Roger needs to be able to deal with a chaotic amount of noise. But one of the key like design decisions of Roger has been focusing memory around projects because I mean, obviously in Planes as an agency, that's how we divvy up our work. We have specific teams. They're normally bound to one or two Slack channels, all focusing on one project. And so, yeah, just looking for those kind of ways of slightly siloing and focusing Roger's focus to kind of like synthesize into like uh, appropriate like silos of memory, if that makes sense. Um, cool. Hopefully that kind of answers that one.
And an easy one on how do you sign up for a free AI intro session? I think on the screen right now there's like two emails. Feel free to email either one of those, and we'll let you know.
And then Alex has asked, how do you coach or tune Roger's proactivity? So this has been a fun one actually, because inevitably, inevitably we kind of started by dialing Roger up. So he was really pretty chatty, and actually, it was a bit silly of me because I was the one that made the call on on his chattiness levels, and then went away on a week's holiday and just just watched how the team got on. And he, came back with lots of great stuff, but it was definitely over chatty. And since then, uh, it's done through a classification prompt. So it's literally a prompt that defines the kind of things to look out for in a thread or a particular activity that's happened. So what we've done is I've created 3 levels, and I can select on a per project basis the level to which we want Roger to be chatty. So on some projects, it's not as useful for Roger to be so chatty, so we turn it down. And then for others, all the way to the top, because there's a lot of activity, and so it's not as obvious when Roger's being over chatty, if that makes sense.
There's a really good one here by Sadaf. AI automation is great. How do you think companies can manage the blockers, time needed for speed caused by how teams interact and work together? Um, if I understand that question correctly, I think it's like you can speed up all different workflows, right? But there are some. I think that the bottlenecks change to different parts of the way that a team works. So we use Claude Code now a lot, right? So a lot of our code or the actual development is supported by agents. And when we come to estimate like a piece of development on a larger project, um, we're typically estimating about like 60% less than we would have sort of 12 months ago, right? But that doesn't actually mean that the time taken in terms of like calendar days, it's going to be 60% less, because we've found that the bottlenecks move from, okay, we need to wait for development to finish, to, hey, how do we make sure we're asking the right question, or that this is the right solution? So when you start to come up against those, you find that it provides some benefits as well. So we're definitely seeing that our engineers, they're starting to have a lot more time thinking about solutions with other members of the team, product managers, developers, product managers, designers, or the client as well, before they actually go away and build. So absolutely, we're just going to change the way or the shape of like your teams. You just need to be cognizant of like where those bottlenecks now end up.
Cool. So there's one in here about how do you mix up a messy day-to-day working file? So this is within Roger's memory. How do we prevent that from getting mixed up with the more hardened long-term memories, like significant pieces of knowledge, I suppose, about planes or projects that need to remain there rather than the day-to-day events that happen along the way? So I think this is probably something that we've not perfected yet because I mean it's just a totally chaotic situation to really like know binary whether it's working or not. But I'd say at the moment it feels roughly right. We do a few things. There are a few different like levers we have to pull. So the first gate we have is in when a new memory comes in, or sorry, when a new piece of information comes in. We have an agent that synthesizes that piece of information. So it's not just writing to a file. It tries to understand in more depth that information and then does some effectively deep research on the existing memory. And then it makes a judgment on how to act. So whether it's merging with an existing memory or adding a new one or removing an old one or however it might be. We also effectively run that same step overnight. So every night there's dreaming, which will go and run an agent that's deep researching across memory to spot conflicts or spot duplicates, and then just it sort of manages that memory and just like make sure it makes sense in its entirety. And then there's also the more like active day to day. So as the example that I showed earlier, where I jumped from tool to tool, that was done through conversation memory. So as a user, if I'm communicating with Roger in Slack, if I then go and communicate with Roger in Linear or Claude, that past conversation is persisted in context for Roger in every tool. So that means you can kind of pick up where you left off in the past tools so that you can kind of so he's got that more active memory. And then finally, for the more solidified long-term planes level things, we have an org level memory system. So that's all stored. That's updated less because it's not focused on projects. There's no granola feeding into it and GitHub and all that sort of stuff. So it's less real time.
There's one there, Henry, around the fact that planes built everything around Anthropic, but of course, like we have clients who want to use different models.
So actually, Roger is not built on Anthropic. I've been switching models. We use a tool called AI Gateway, which means that we can switch over to any model, whether it be one of the deep seeks, or we can go to GPTs or anything. And so I've been playing with that and actually found that in many cases GPT one of the GPT models has been best performing for cost versus performance. And so we switch all over the place. But yeah, our day-to-day working, we tend to be in Claude, so we're using skills and the like for that sort of stuff. But when we're building products, we switch all over the place, or whatever suits the kind of clients.
There's one there around, have you been able to measure productivity gains or other benefits from the implementation of your internal AI tools? Yeah, this is an interesting one because I think some of the benefits we get to enjoy ourselves, and then a huge amount of benefit goes directly to our clients. So I said before that we can build faster. That just really means that we're achieving more, working more efficiently for our clients, which is great. But then I guess it also helps us internally as well. And rather than looking like at those kind of like big, KPIs at a business level, which are complex and it's hard to kind of measure impacts of like individual workflows, we try and look at the workflow at a workflow level, and that might be both like qualitative and quantitative. But if you take like an example one, onboarding new team members is a really easy example. If you wanted to onboard someone new to a project before, whilst you could have a lot of documentation, which in itself is like very, very time consuming to create, you need to do a lot of pairing to make sure that a person has enough context and got up and working really efficiently. But when you have something like Roger, any question can just get answered by Roger rather than another team member. So we can sort of see that it's already dropped the like onboarding time needed in terms of like person hours by like 50%, which is great.
Cool. And we just had one from Harrison, who I see he's just dropped. But so he's asked, how do you manage the maintenance and evolution of Roger? Is there a single owner or a team? A challenge he's experienced is elevating AI tools in organizations, whether it's like open source or a proof of concept, and taking them to production is kind of difficult, especially in organizations where they're all very busy working on their own things. Yeah, wouldn't say I have a great kind of silver bullet for this. At the moment, I've been kind of managing the development. I've had a couple of developers contribute, which has been awesome. I'd say at the moment, now with these kind of AI tools, what's been great is that it's so easy to do async. So if I get 10 minutes between a meeting, I can actually do something meaningful, fix a bug, or add a small feature. But yeah, it is hard, and I'd say it's definitely something that's tricky in owning these sorts of things, especially as they grow in complexity. And then the example that I showed with the skill earlier, where we look at post hog, we then go and create linear tickets and then produce pull requests, is actually something that we do on Roger. So I have a scheduled run that works every morning, I think at 8 a.m. That goes and looks at post hog and adds tickets, and if it thinks it can work on them, it will go and create a pull request for me to review and test in a staging environment. So I'd say that sort of workflow is becoming a reality to an extent, but obviously it's only really for those sort of minor bug fixes or small improvements as we see. So I'll jump over to Toyosi's question about how do you manage data privacy in a multi-model context? So when you're relatively straightforward when building your own AI products such as Roger, there are a few options. In a few projects, we're using Azure's OpenAI self-deployed models, so we have our own instance of GPT in a few different projects, which means that they're not training on your data and it's an isolated environment. Bedrock is probably the more accessible way of achieving that. So they have a lot of the open source models deployed on Bedrock, which is an AWS product. And they've also got some of the Anthropic models on there too. And that again, it means you can know that they're not training on your data, and it's all done in the same kind of closed system. So yeah, definitely, if you're building your own products, it's relatively straightforward to do that. A few different options, and then if you're in Claude, get yourself a team or enterprise license, or obviously the same with all the other providers, because those come with all those sorts of privacy kind of levers.
Right, folks, we're at time. There's a couple more questions we didn't get around to, but what we'll do is we'll just write those down and we'll email you specifically, so we don't leave you hanging. But thank you so much for coming. If you want to chat more about it, please get in touch. Our emails are on this page. But yeah, have a lovely Friday, enjoy the sun, and have a great weekend. Catch you later.